Susan Matthews raised her champagne flute with a steady hand, the soft clink of crystal echoing in the grand ballroom. Her heart pounded beneath the elegant silk of her navy blue dress as she prepared to shatter nearly 3 decades of carefully guarded silence. Across the table, Michael Matthews, her husband of 28 years, paused mid-toast, his own glass suspended in midair. 50 pairs of eyes flicked between them, brimming with expectation, tears, anger, perhaps even a scene. Instead, Susan offered a serene smile. "Thank you for your honesty," she said, voice clear and warm. "I'm proud of you for finally telling the truth." Gasps rippled through the room. Emily, their daughter, fresh in her cap and gown, stared at her father with wide, horrified eyes. At the back, a woman Susan once counseled, Rachel Johnson, Michael's longtime friend turned secret companion, shifted uncomfortably among acquaintances who had all kept the same damning secret. Through practiced calm, Susan reached into her beaded clutch and laid a pale ivory envelope beside Michael's plate. "What is this?" he managed, his triumphant grin faltering. "Consider it a roadmap for your new life," she replied, turning to Emily. She kissed her daughter's cheek and whispered, "Today is still all about you." Then, with poised cordiality, she addressed the stunned guests. "Please, enjoy your meal. I wish you all a delightful afternoon." Folding her napkin, she rose gracefully and walked toward the grand doors, as the heavy oak swung shut behind her. Carolina's summer heat enveloped Susan like a liberating embrace, her first true breath of freedom. 3 months before that fateful graduation luncheon, Susan Matthews first sensed that something was amiss in her carefully ordered world. For 28 years, she had put her own ambitions on hold, setting aside the financial consultancy she'd dreamed of launching so she could shore up Michael's turbulent career pivots. When he swapped a stable corporate role for a risky restaurant venture in downtown Charlotte, Susan quietly picked up extra shifts at Truvanta Corporation, logging late nights in the accounting department to ensure tuition and mortgage were paid. She rearranged her calendars around his erratic schedule, ironed his dress shirts at dawn, and even postponed her daughter Emily's piano recitals so Michael could attend pitch meetings in Atlanta. Through it all, Susan's identity had become inseparable from the roles of wife, mother, and family treasurer. Late one evening, while balancing the last column of June's bank statement, Susan paused at a tiny, unmarked line item, a $350 transfer to an unfamiliar account. She frowned, her pen hovering over the ledger she maintained in meticulous penmanship. That evening, she double-checked July's statement, then August's same pattern, slightly larger amounts, $425 in July, $550 in August. At first, she chalked it up to a fee or a misposted expense. After all, she'd learned over 3 decades that Michael's entrepreneurial spirit tended to generate unexpected bills. But when a notification arrived on her phone, a $100 withdrawal at a high-end steakhouse 2 towns over, Susan's practiced composure was jolted. She hadn't accompanied him to dinner that night, rather than confront him outright. Susan followed her instincts. She opened a separate spreadsheet to log each anomaly date, amount, counterparty. She matched restaurant names to credit card receipts and recognized places they only visited on anniversary trips, never on random weeknights. When Michael called from his office to ask why the electric bill had bounced, Susan simply replied, "I'll look into it. Inside." Her pulse quickened, but her voice remained steady. Over the next few weeks, as the early autumn breeze drifted through their Carolina home, Susan pieced together more than just financial missteps. She discovered email confirmations of reservations under the name Rachel Johnson, a woman Susan had mentored when Rachel was a junior analyst at Truvanta 5 years earlier. Susan had given Rachel career advice, recommended her for promotions, even invited her to holiday dinners. Now she saw that Rachel's dinner reservations matched the dates of those mysterious withdrawals. The betrayal cut deeper than a simple account discrepancy. It was a woman she had once counted as family. Susan redoubled her discreet investigation. She gently borrowed Michael's unlocked laptop one morning, navigating through his browser history and finding text messages that spoke of our new life and plans for the week after Emily's graduation. She printed copies of these messages and tucked them into her desk drawer, next to her wedding vows and Emily's preschool drawings. Throughout it all, she maintained her outward calm. She calmly answered Michael's calls about budgeting, drafted quarterly tax estimates, and filled in for him at PTA meetings, even as her heart hammered with the knowledge of his deception. In the quiet, pre-dawn hours, Susan replayed every memory of their marriage the night Michael confessed he couldn't sleep because he was finding himself again. The morning he sold her grandmother's pearls to fund a business prototype. The afternoons she spent consoling Emily when Michael was lost in his passion projects. She realized that her sacrifices had not only sustained their family, they had, unwittingly, masked the clues of his affair until Susan chose to see them. By the time she laid that cream-colored envelope beside Michael's plate at the graduation luncheon, Susan had transformed from the devoted caretaker into a strategist. Every small transfer, every whispered dinner reservation, and every long-withheld text message had been carefully documented. But more importantly, Susan had reclaimed her own agency. She no longer needed to defer her dreams or carry hidden burdens. In exposing the betrayal, she was not only protecting her daughter's future, she was affirming the worth of her own 30 years of diligence, foresight, and unwavering love. For weeks, Susan Matthews moved through her days in graceful denial, dutifully balancing ledgers and fielding calls about college applications, all the while masking the sharp sting of suspicion that had begun to take root in her heart. It was during an otherwise ordinary Friday afternoon when Michael, her husband of 28 years, claimed to be tied up with a client in downtown Charleston that she first noticed the discrepancies. One by one, the entries caught her eye. Lunches at upscale steakhouses she had never attended, hotel charges in towns she'd never visited, and recurring wire transfers to an account she'd never heard of, a finance professional with 3 decades of careful practice. Susan prided herself on noticing even the smallest anomaly, and these red flags would not be ignored. Late that evening, she slipped into her home office, closing the door quietly so their golden retriever, Buddy, wouldn't bark. Michael's laptop, left unlocked and unattended, beckoned. Susan tapped through folders of statements and reservation confirmations. She cross-referenced the charges with email confirmations in Michael's inbox and found dinner reservations under the name Rachel Johnson. Her pulse quickened at the realization. Rachel was the bright young analyst Susan had mentored at Truvanta Corporation 5 years earlier. The realization felt like a physical blow. This was more than financial mismanagement. It was a betrayal of trust and friendship. In the glare of the desk lamp, Susan printed each incriminating document: dinner bills from the Capitol Grill, room charges at the Bellman Charleston Place, and bank transfers that steadily increased in amount. She color-coded them on a large corkboard: blue for restaurants, red for hotels, green for wire transfers. The pattern told a story he could no longer hide. Michael's midlife escapade wasn't just a passing fancy, it was a calculated plan, funded on her dime. Emotion threatened to overwhelm her, but Susan steadied herself. She reminded herself of the countless sacrifices she had made, postponed business dreams, extra shifts at Truvanta to cover tuition bills, and unwavering support through his 3 career changes. She'd offered counseling to Rachel Johnson when the young analyst questioned her own career path. How cruel that Rachel should repay her kindness with clandestine dates and stolen dinner tabs. Susan felt a deep sorrow for her daughter, Emily, who was on the cusp of graduating summa cum laude, unaware that her parents' marriage was unraveling in a maze of clandestine transactions. Over the next few days, Susan expanded her investigation. She enlisted the help of her close friend and paralegal, Marjorie Clark, under the guise of getting a second opinion on her spreadsheets. Marjorie, as meticulous as Susan herself, suggested they obtain cell phone records and cross-check text message timestamps with the times of those unaccounted for charges. It wasn't long before they uncovered explicit texts detailing weekend getaways, plans for a fresh start, and references to jewelry purchases. Purchases Michael had told Susan were for anniversary gifts. Each new piece of evidence carried the sting of betrayal, romantic dinner orders, hotel check-ins at 3 p.m., and urgent can't wait to see you messages sent in the middle of the day. Susan documented everything chronologically, building a timeline that stretched back more than a year. In her desk drawer lay the original prenuptial agreement she had signed 28 years earlier, an agreement Michael had insisted upon to protect his nascent business earnings. Ironically, that same document would soon become the key to his undoing. Susan's nights were restless. She replayed every phone call in her mind, every excuse he'd offered, every time he'd claimed, "I just need some space to find myself." She realized how easy it had been to overlook his shifting priorities when her own career dreams were placed on hold. In the cold light of reconsideration, she recognized that she'd been both the architect and the victim of their shared life. She built and maintained the financial foundation, while he quietly siphoned off funds for the affair. By the time the Sunday before Emily's graduation arrived, Susan felt a combination of heartbreak and relief. She had gathered attorney recommendations from trusted colleagues, enlisted Marjorie's help to secure certified copies of the bank statements, and printed the final draft of divorce papers. She even scheduled a meeting with her own financial advisor to ensure her plans for a women's consultancy could proceed without financial interruption. That afternoon, Susan typed a single line in an email to Marjorie. "Everything is ready. Tomorrow. The moment arrives." She hit send and exhaled, feeling the weight of months of secrecy lift from her shoulders. In her quiet home office, surrounded by neatly pinned evidence and the glow of the computer screen, Susan realized that confronting Michael's betrayal was the most pivotal act of self-care she had ever undertaken. It wasn't vengeance she sought. It was justice, clarity, and ultimately, the freedom to reclaim her own life. Tomorrow, she resolved, would be the day that marked not just Emily's academic triumph, but the beginning of Susan's own new chapter. Over the weeks that followed her discovery, Susan Matthews transformed from the quietly devoted wife into a master strategist. She knew exactly which clause in her 28-year-old prenuptial agreement she would wield as her most powerful weapon, the fidelity provision that Michael had insisted upon when his fledgling business first showed promise. While he'd believed that clause protected him, Susan recognized it would become the instrument of his undoing. First, she assembled her team under the guise of routine bookkeeping. She enlisted Marjorie Clark, her longtime friend, and a meticulous paralegal to help organize the evidence. Together, they created a secure folder on Susan's encrypted home computer. Into it went every dinner receipt from the Capitol Grill and Morton's, hotel bills from Savannah, and wire transfer records totaling more than $45,000 that had quietly funneled into Michael's secret account over the previous 14 months. Next, she consulted with Philip Anderson, a divorce attorney she'd once recommended to a colleague. She described the suspicious transactions and Michael's covert relationship with Rachel Johnson, details she corroborated with text messages Michael left unlocked on his phone. Philip confirmed her interpretation of the prenuptial agreement. The fidelity clause remained in effect for the entire duration of the marriage, without expiration, and any intentional marital misconduct opened the door for forfeiture of shared assets and the family home. Over a series of discreet lunches, always with her phone on silent, Susan and Philip fine-tuned the legal attack plan. They agreed on timing serve the divorce papers the morning of Emily's graduation, before Michael could announce his planned new beginning at the celebratory luncheon. This would ensure that the court records existed, yet remained sealed until officially delivered, leaving Michael blindsided. In parallel, Susan worked with her financial advisor, another trusted ally, to create a post-divorce budget for herself and Emily. She ensured she could maintain the mortgage, college savings, and her planned consultancy startup on her own. At night, She drafted her resignation letter from Truvanta Corporation, preparing to step into her own business as soon as the divorce was final. By the time the graduation weekend arrived, Susan's plan was laid out in cold, clear detail. 1. Evidence package. A color-coded binder organized by date: blue tabs for restaurant dates, red for hotel stays, and green for wire transfers, ready for the family court clerk. 2. Legal filings. The complaint for divorce, custody acknowledgement for Emily, and a motion to freeze joint accounts under the infidelity clause, all signed and notarized. 3. Personal logistics. Overnight bag packed at her sister Diana's home, where she would regroup after serving the papers. Prepaid cell phone with Philip's office on speed dial. Appointment scheduled with a branding consultant to launch Matthew's financial transitions. 4. Support network. Marjorie on standby to file emergency papers if needed, Diana ready to host Susan and Emily, and a small circle of friends prepared to lend moral support. Early on the morning of the ceremony, Susan slipped the ivory envelope containing the stamped divorce complaint and the accompanying freeze motion onto Michael's pillow at their colonial-style home in historic Augusta. She then drove to the venue in silence, her pulse calm, her mind focused. When Michael unexpectedly brandished his champagne flute at the luncheon, expecting only applause for his honesty, Susan reacted with the poise she'd rehearsed thousands of times: a gracious smile, a congratulatory nod to Emily, and a graceful exit that drew every eye in the room. Michael's triumphant grin shattered when he returned home and opened the envelope. The court clerk's stamp confirmed the documents were active. His calls went unanswered. His texts bounced off the silent screen of Susan's phone. Within 24 hours, the joint accounts were frozen, the family home secured for Susan and Emily, and Michael's plans for beachfront property and a new life with Rachel effectively halted. The fidelity clause that had once seemed like a favor to him had, in fact, been Susan's greatest safeguard. By orchestrating her strategy around that single, powerful provision, Susan didn't just protect her daughter's future, she reclaimed her own. In leveraging the very document Michael had insisted upon, she delivered a lesson in foresight, careful planning, and the quiet strength of a woman who refused to be sidelined any longer. The morning of the preliminary hearing dawned cool and overcast, a familiar North Carolina spring breeze rustling the magnolia leaves outside the courthouse. Susan Matthews arrived early, accompanied by her attorney, Philip Anderson, and her steadfast friend and paralegal, Marjorie Clark, clutching a slim briefcase that contained the color-coded evidence binder. Susan felt a quiet confidence settle around her every dinner receipt. Wire transfer record and hotel invoice had been meticulously organized. The fidelity clause in her prenuptial agreement was ironclad, and the freeze motion had been filed without alerting Michael. Inside the small courtroom, the judge, a woman in her late 60s with perceptive eyes, reviewed the documents. Philip stood and addressed the bench in measured tones. Your Honor, we respectfully request a temporary freeze on the joint Matthews accounts, pursuant to Section 12 of the prenuptial agreement, which remains in effect for the duration of the marriage. We have submitted evidence of systematic financial misconduct and intentional marital misconduct by Mr. Matthews. He handed the judge Susan's binder, its tabs clearly visible. Susan watched as the judge leafed through the evidence restaurant receipts from the Capitol Grill, totaling more than $15,000. Wire transfers that escalated from $350 to $200 monthly. Text message printouts referencing our new life together. And hotel charges at Savannah's River Street Inn under the name Rachel Johnson. The judge paused at the fidelity clause itself. It stated unequivocally that any extramarital affair would trigger forfeiture of all jointly held assets and immediate protection of the innocent spouse's residence. When Michael's attorney, a junior associate unfamiliar with family law, intricacies attempted to argue that the prenuptial agreement had expired after so many years, The judge raised an eyebrow. Section 18 clearly states the agreement governs the term of the marriage, plus any ensuing legal proceedings, she said. There is no sunset provision or expiration date. Turning to Michael, she added, Mr. Matthews, I advise you to review the document you signed 28 years ago. With a curt nod, the judge issued her ruling. The joint accounts were frozen, accessible only for routine living expenses, not to exceed a modest monthly allowance. The family home remained in Susan's possession, and Michael's access was limited to his personal checking account, which he had been quietly padding all along. A temporary guardianship order ensured their daughter, Emily, would continue to live with Susan, free from the threat of sudden eviction or financial disruption. As the gavel struck, Susan felt a deep sense of relief. The first phase of her plan had succeeded. The assets she and Emily relied on for college tuition and household bills were secure, and Michael's ability to fund a beachfront condo or lavish dinners on Rachel had been legally suspended. Outside the courtroom, word traveled fast. Friends of the family, some offering hushed congratulations. Others, silent in shock, stepped aside to let Susan pass. Marjorie slipped her arm around Susan's shoulders. You did it, she whispered. He never saw it coming. Later that afternoon, sitting in the sunlit parlor of her sister Diana's nearby bungalow, Susan poured a glass of iced tea and reflected on the morning's events. Emily, still processing the drama, hugged her mother tightly and whispered, I'm so proud of you. For Susan. The hearing had been more than a legal victory. It was a powerful affirmation that foresight, careful planning, and unwavering self-respect could triumph over betrayal. As the courtroom order took effect, freezing Michael's plans and protecting the Matthews legacy, Susan quietly began to envision her next chapter, one built on her own terms, with the dignity and security she so richly deserved. 2 weeks after the preliminary hearing, the Matthews household felt suddenly lighter. News had traveled quickly through their social circle. Cassandra Johnson, the woman Michael had been quietly funding, had packed her things and moved out. It was as if her departure left behind not only empty walls in the little apartment off King Street, but also the last fragile thread tying Michael to the plans he'd so meticulously laid. Susan Matthews watched the front door close behind Cassandra's taxi, and for the first time in over a year, she didn't feel a pang of jealousy or despair. She felt relief and a quiet, steady excitement for what was to come. In the following days, Susan turned her full attention to rebuilding the life she'd momentarily set aside. While Michael wrestled with the onerous restrictions the court had placed on his finances, Susan met with her financial advisor, Carla Nguyen, in a sunlit conference room at Truvanta Corporation. Together, they laid out a detailed budget for her nascent consultancy, Matthews Financial Transitions. Carla helped Susan map projected revenues based on modest retainer fees, $150 per hour for individual consultations, sliding scale rates for single mothers, and flat packages for estate planning reviews. They set conservative revenue targets for the first quarter, accounting for marketing expenses like local newspaper ads and printing informational brochures. That afternoon, Susan signed the lease for a small office suite in downtown Charlotte, just 6 blocks from the courthouse where her life had briefly felt under siege. At 250 square feet, the space was modest, a reception nook, 2 desks, and a shelving unit for reference books and client files. But to Susan, it represented autonomy. She commissioned a simple but elegant sign, black serif lettering on brushed stainless steel, reading Matthews Financial Transitions. She scheduled her grand opening for 4 weeks later, giving herself time to assemble her client intake packet and refine her presentation. Her first 2 clients came through word of mouth. Marjorie Clark, her steadfast paralegal friend, referred Susan to her cousin, Laura Vasquez, who was going through a divorce and needed help untangling joint accounts. Laura arrived at Susan's new office clutching a manila folder of statements, eyes brimming with gratitude over the course of their 3-hour meeting. Susan helped Laura categorize every expense, identify hidden fees in her ex-husband's credit card statements, and draft a post-divorce budget that prioritized living expenses, rent, utilities, and their teenage son's tuition at a private middle school. Laura left the office that day with a clear path forward and a hug that warmed Susan's heart more than any thank you letter. Word of Laura's success spread quickly among the local Moms Club and the Richmond Heights Women's Alliance. Within days, Susan was meeting with two more women, one, a retired school teacher planning her estate, the other, a mid-career executive worried about supporting her aging parents while saving for her own retirement. Susan guided them through the nuances of Social Security spousal benefits, 401k rollovers, and even the basics of reverse mortgages, always mindful to explain each concept in plain, straightforward language. She learned quickly to adjust her pace, slowing down when her clients' eyes glazed over financial jargon and speeding up when they gained confidence in their grasp of the material. Meanwhile, Emily, freshly graduated and now employed at a marketing firm in Charleston, called home every evening. "Mom, you're building something incredible," she said one night as Susan packed up her laptop under the glow of her desk lamp. "I never realized how few people really understand their own finances. You're doing more than I ever imagined." Those words fueled Susan's resolve. She began drafting a short e-newsletter, Money Matters for Life Transitions, which she planned to send monthly to her clients and community contacts. Her first issue covered budgeting for medical expenses, a topic that resonated deeply with seniors facing rising healthcare costs. By the end of the quarter, Matthew's Financial Transitions had booked more than 20 consultations and secured 3 ongoing retainer agreements with local nonprofit organizations that offered support to women in crisis. Susan hired an assistant, a recent college graduate named Olivia Perez, to help manage scheduling and client follow-up. Together, they transformed the little downtown office into a lively hub of empowerment and education. On a crisp Saturday morning, Susan stood in front of a room at the Richmond Heights Community Center, addressing a group of 20 women, most of them retirees or soon-to-be retirees, about maximizing Social Security benefits. As she spoke, she felt a profound sense of purpose. This was more than a business. It was her mission to ensure that no one would have to navigate life's financial crossroads feeling lost or alone. When she returned home that evening, Emily met her at the door with a bottle of her favorite Chardonnay and 2 tall glasses. They sat on the back porch, watching fireflies emerge over the magnolia trees. Emily raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she toasted. Susan smiled, her heart full. It was indeed a new beginning, one built on her own terms, armed with hard-won wisdom and a determination that went far beyond revenge. In reclaiming her future, Susan had become something greater than the devoted wife she once was. She had become a mentor, an advocate, and the author of her own next chapter. Susan Matthews' story didn't end at the courthouse steps, it was just beginning. 6 months after her divorce was finalized, on what would have been her 29th wedding anniversary, she'd transformed her personal setback into professional triumph. Matthews Financial Transitions, her boutique consultancy in downtown Charlotte, now employed 2 associates and served over 50 clients, many of them women navigating life after loss or divorce. Susan drew on the very skills she honed raising tuition payments and balancing joint accounts, meticulous attention to detail, empathetic listening, and a steadfast belief that anyone can gain control of their finances. Each morning, she poured a cup of coffee, reviewed client files ranging from reverse mortgage counseling to retirement planning workshops, and felt a surge of purpose she'd never known as just someone's wife. When her daughter Emily stopped by after work, the pride in her eyes was undeniable. "Mom," Emily said, "you've given women a roadmap to independence." To Susan, that simple affirmation was more rewarding than any courtroom victory. Life lesson in community. Call to action. Susan's journey teaches us that it's never too late to reclaim your future. Whether you're facing unexpected change, caring for loved ones, or planning for retirement, understanding your finances can empower you to take charge of your life. If Susan's story resonated with you, share your own experience or question in the comments. Your insight may inspire someone else. And if you'd like more real-world tips on navigating money transitions, please subscribe and join our community. Together, we'll turn life's challenges into fresh beginnings.